communication power of language. So yeah. Does that make sense to everyone? Does anyone have like immediate, I don't know, thoughts of like, we shouldn't do this. We should do it differently.
I'll just share that I've been in various spaces in organizations and groups that probably many of us have trying to do something like this, and it isn't easy. Um, it's a kind of, it's not easy. And we can talk more about, I'm curious what people have ideas, but I think there's a number of parallel processes. Like another one is before you draw a membrane, sometimes it helps to just say, to talk about aspirations or purposes or goals and try to connect goals. And you understand what I mean, Pavel? Like,
Yeah.
there needs to be there has to be something bottom up that meets something top down. And I don't know if maybe it's very clear to people and it's ready for this kind of top down constraint. To me, it's less so
Mhm.
that, but yeah. So
Yeah.
I don't know precisely how to do that.
Yeah.
Perhaps some kind of just fielding
Yeah.
aspirations, purposes, or goals.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I can say a little because I work in groups quite different from this normally, and we're working with emergence and things about how do we step into spaces where we don't know where we're going yet. So really it's about being able to, if you say this is where I need to go, how are you going to end up somewhere new and different and novel? So it's almost like you need both. You need to kind of oscillate between planned stuff and then, I mean, I would say something like meeting up as a group with Birmingham Dialogues or something like that, where you're just kind of jamming about stuff and just seeing where it goes. And it's about also learning those skills of holding space and having a certain amount of restraint and just allowing, it's the kind of interbeing, the in between creative new novel things, but I wouldn't say you do that all the time, but I think if you don't do some of that, you're going to miss perhaps some opportunities. We'll miss something valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. So shared aspirations and goals, kind of free-flowing dialogue, balancing top down, formalized, this is who we are versus this kind of emergence, right? So this session, I guess we're trying to have a little bit of emergence of these sorts of defining characteristics. So, yeah.
I mean, for me, the question would be, what is the ideal thing you could imagine that you want to achieve? Sort of, if you could sort of freely think, ideally, what would be the best
Yeah.
possible outcome, what you want to have? And so what I'm seeing so far is that there are people who are interested in scientific topics, and they talk about scientific topics, and that's very meaningful, and it's very meaningful to them. But there's also an openness here that you normally don't find in a scientific community. There's a kind of openness to sort of a bigger picture, and sort of that religion is welcome, but also philosophy and mindfulness and meditation. And normally you don't have that in a scientific community. So what I would say that what for me it seems is the defining feature here is this openness.
Mhm.
And so this is almost, it's sort of, for me, this is almost like the foundation of a friendship. So here's kind of a friendship is possible between those people. And there's like a lot of connection here. So therefore, I see this more like as a group that is bound together by the second aspect rather than by the science. So the science is something that we discuss, but that's not something that we do together. It's
Mhm.
so far, it seems to me. And the meditation is something that we actually do together. And I
Mhm.
find that beautiful. And I think we need this because in the scientific world, I find so many people who are really frustrated and alienated by this dogmatic opposition that science has against anything that sounds like religion or depth, I would call it even worldview. There's something really deep missing about the scientific community. And in the scientific community, you hear statements like, science has shown the universe exists for no reason and has no purpose. And sort of this is almost the dogma that you accept as a scientist. And if you don't have this dogma, you are kind of weird. And that's, I think, what we could offer. Like a home for those people who accept that there are deeper things out there. That are willing to discuss what is actually the purpose of life. That are willing to discuss what is a human being, does a human being have a soul? Where could you bring that up in a scientific conversation?
Yeah, I want to just echo that there's something maybe, I think in the original framing where I was thinking about like, okay, how does this eventually look like what I understand of other scientific communities I've been a part of, and like, what's our journal, and like, and those sorts of things. And maybe those are interesting questions. But I think from Martin's reframe, it's like, oh, maybe there's like something else, secret society, or there's something else that's like a nourishing force for the people who are doing science in other contexts. And it's not that you then don't want to transform those contexts as well necessarily, but there's maybe a different kind of role something could play. And maybe that's different from like, your other spiritual or meditative communities, in that there's this shared kind of almost like neurotype or cognitive affinity, interest in science, kind of language, shared languages. There's certain things held in common that make it easier to find a kind of resonance as a group. But yeah, this idea that it's serving this other social purpose within the broader sociology of science, I think is quite a compelling take.
So yeah, I love this, and I love this perspective that, it's not about complexity science and contemplative studies. Maybe the core thing is actually something completely different, right? About this more openness, more friendship, and something that's missing in science. But for now, we'll continue this discussion in smaller groups after this first bit, but just wanted to get us like thinking about these topics in this direction. And now, yeah, let's go through a bit of a reflection on what happened so far so we can start together from that common ground that we've already established. So, okay, so now I'll do my 1 minute thing of what happened in the complexity discussion. So basically, we went through some of like what is complexity science as I view it, and some of the questions that came up in that were, do I remember? We discussed, I guess, yeah, Martin. Martin, you were bringing something up in the first day quite a lot. There was, no, I'm not gonna remember. Okay, I'll come back to it when I let's keep going, just because I wasn't now in this mind space, and I'm not gonna force anything. So, yeah, who was next?
So do we have anyone who is in John Dunn's group, the complex contemplative studies overview? Yeah, Xavier, do you want to give a little 1 minute recap of what happened there?
Sure, and anybody else in the session, I see Jen and probably some other folks might hop in because I don't have notes on this, so kind of free associating. But one of the points, I mean, John was sharing a little bit about the contemplative science journal and that sort of world, and then talking a bit about the sort of challenge of definitions in this space. And so, like, what do we even mean when we say contemplation? He suggested that one reason he was calling contemplation and not meditation was because meditation was already very loaded culturally, and so it was like a little bit more open field to say contemplation. And then he asked for people's senses of definitions, and he gave their own kind of. He doesn't have a definition exactly, but like a 3-part kind of idea of what might be considered contemplation. I don't remember all 3, but like there's something you are contemplating. It has a content, and it's about. I think there's a transformative quality, and there's a sense of clarity. That's what I remember. And then people were kind of coming in with their own sort of thoughts on what maybe that meant to them, as I recall. Oh yeah, tradition behind it as well. And that was an interesting point. He was like, sometimes we like skip over the tradition part when we talk about meditation in a lot of the pop culture, and like how important is the tradition side of it. That came up a little bit as well.
Great, thank you. And then was someone in Brandon's group on complexity leadership?
Yes, I did. I
Great.
was. Um, yeah, let's see. Brendan was giving an overview of how he looks at complexity when he's facilitating various organizations and trying to the general philosophy of it was um, not to let hierarchy and other kind of constructions like block the information flow. And I think that in general, maybe as a group, we should indeed consult Gary in understanding how we would like to leverage his experience in facilitating such endeavor. And yes, I can say that the way so I've my personal experience through this world of group facilitation. The past period of like past 1 year or so was going through frameworks such as Theory U and the art of hosting, participatory leadership, and I think that these perspectives are indeed ways of organization that we should look to get some inspiration of how we can better collaborate on such field. Not only to do research, but we indeed want to practice what we would like to.
Great. Thank you. I can go to Ryan.
Well, I guess to come back
Oh,
to our session,
yeah.
I realized, yeah, the reason I don't remember is because when I was facilitating, I wasn't taking notes. So maybe, Ahmed, do you have a sense of what you got out of this complexity session, or what you felt like was
Are you talking about the small group discussion about dynamical systems?
the first? Yeah, yeah, the first discussion that I was leading on the first day. I think you were there, right?
On the first discussion, there's been I don't have that kind of brain. You can
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'll need more cue, maybe even
I
do you
mean, we
remember
were talking
do you
about,
remember the
okay,
title of it, Pavel?
yeah, complexity. But it was kind of
No.
distinction between between complexity and systems thinking, like what makes complexity, right? And I guess this theme was coming up a bunch of like how does complexity specifically inform things, like what is dynamical systems theory, how is that different than complexity science? In what sense, is it broader, and how you define it? And I was saying that complexity science is kind of this agglomeration of tools to try to do the unsolvable and to try to have this humility in the face of the unsolvable, so that, like, systems in a lab we can study, but systems out in the real world um, are fundamentally, like complex systems, are fundamentally defined by this thing that we cannot fully understand them. And so to me, the first point of complexity science is humility, and is this admission that I will not understand the system. And therefore, I will not, start with like, well, I know it's made of atoms. It's like, no, I don't know anything, right? So what do I do then, right? Is there anything we can do? And sort of this question of dynamical systems is one tool we can use, phase transitions, network science, but at the same time, it's like none of these really work, because that's the fundamental point, is this, like, I don't know. Okay.
Great. Yeah, so then also just to zoom out a little bit, that first day, just so we can kind of put ourselves back in our memory, the point of those discussions was to try to lay some kind of foundations. And so all of these, the first discussions, like what is complexity science? What do we mean by that? What is contemplative studies? And that point of tradition, I think, is interesting, is something that we all kind of identify with, is related to that. And then how do we organize these groups? And the second round was also trying to be sort of fundamental, but with a little more specific detail of giving examples. And so, Ryan, do you want to just give a brief word on what you did there? Or is it more or less the same as what happened in the practice, or kind of what did you bring in specifically to that? Is Ryan still here? No, Ryan is not here anymore, I think. But I believe that his discussion group was very closely related to that practice that he led on the second date, which is this concept of polarity as an enabling concept, as this term that allows us to see more, and actually in a similar way that Gary was just telling us about how language shapes perception. And I think it's interesting, yeah, particularly for this group, because one application of it is this polarity of reduction and emergence, and how it's easy to collapse into one of those, that we just like reduction and like anything else is bad, or like we just like the whole and that we don't like the reduction, but actually neither of these can exist without the other one. So they're somehow opposites, but you actually like destroy both of them if you like, well, each can only exist in virtue of the other in a certain sense. And so kind of having that as a principle to bring through a lot of these discussions. So then, Amit, do you want to give word on your talk on the discussion on the dynamical systems?
I can try briefly. We talked about a narrower idea conceptually and methodologically than I think some of these other sessions. The aspiration was like, okay, where is a starting point and one starting point? There's probably a number of parallel starting points, but one starting point is, so there are existing pretty well developed ideas about properties of dynamical systems that share features where there's some debate about those features and how they interrelate, but there's some understanding. And what kind of ideas might emerge about the phenomena that are being studied in contemporary contemplative science around mindfulness and meditation or compassion, equanimity, and so on, if we look at them through those dynamical systems, properties, and then what might we do with that? Like, how might we formalize them to represent them, for example, in formalized models or computational models? What kind of data might we need to collect in order to begin to empirically study them as dynamical systems? And what initial broad models of data analysis might be applied to get at proxies of those dynamical systems properties of these phenomena of interest? And we didn't get very far because it really is, it's just a starting point for kind of a long road.
Great. Yeah, but it's helpful to have that in the mix as we're thinking about going forward, just how we have some of these specific methods in that to think about applying.
Just
Sure,
want
sure.
to remind people to put emergent themes that they find in the chat, and then upvote and downvote. And also, let's try to stick to maybe like 2 or 3 sentences per discussion, because we have another 10 of them to get through. And that's just the first part of this session. So
Thanks for the reminder, Pavel. Yeah, so now just the last one, Omer, just what your session was on, a couple sentences on cultural as emergent order.
Yes, we're pondering over a very morbid question, which is often disregarded in talking about cultures as emergent phenomena, which is how our the fear of death, which is or the being aware that we are of our finitude in one way or another, like it can be unconsciousness or conscious influence on the society on the larger scale. Like how is this and how is this mediated by cultures? So the framework that we were introducing was Ernest Becker theory from his book The Denial of Death. It was from the 70s, and a psychological treatment of it, which was it's an empirical study who's got the name of terror management theory, in which a group of psychologists are testing all various hypotheses about how is this translated to our day-to-day experience. So this is the general idea, and I think it's a very important discussion because it's kind of a meta. It's kind of looking at various contemplative traditions from the same kind of viewpoint. How do they treat death?
Great. Good. So now we'll move to our second day of discussions, which was trying to look more at what are kind of methods, metrics, methodological challenges. So the first one is the one that I was leading, trying to get at a little bit of how this one 19th century author, same with Taylor Coleridge, talks about how you can apply the methods developed by Francis Bacon to describe how science works, and seeing how that actually has a lot of affinities to the way that Plato describes, or it carries out the method of how contemplative studies work, particularly with this emphasis on getting at that first-person perspective of where are the phenomena actually coming from, and not just resting content with whatever generalization I happen to come up with in the first place. But really wanting to challenge that and trying to get at like, what is the real source for either the internal phenomena or the external phenomena. And then do we have anyone here who was in Pui's group on the science and religion? Yeah, I
Yes,
guess.
I was there.
Okay, great. Yeah. So you can give a couple sentences on that?
I loved his definition of contemplation, and which was new to me. So contemplation is really clarity of vision. And I asked him how that was related to the debate between meditative prayer and contemplative prayer in Christianity, especially in Spain, of Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross. And he said, he gave a very beautiful and very clear answer, and I haven't heard that before so clearly. So meditation is it requires work. So you have to think, and then maybe achieve some goal. And contemplation is something that is given to you. And sort of you get ready, and then it starts to rain inside. The prayer happens inside you as a kind of rain that God is providing. So it's a grace given. And so contemplation as a clear vision, I like that very, very much.
Great. Thank you. So now we can move, just as a reminder to keep putting these emergent topics in, because we're kind of at fast-paced sort of overload of things here, but just attending to those things that have jog your memory of things that you think were important, but you might have forgotten about. So now, Jeff, a couple sentences about yours, if you're still here, or anyone who is in his group. I guess, Pavel, were you in there?
No, I don't think so.
This is on channeling the researcher's human capacities and scientific creation.
Ah. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was. It's like, what would a perfect research day look like? I remember that was a sort of question of like, what sort of work do I want to do? Who do I want to do it with? How much interaction? How little I want to do? Where do I geographically want to live? So in terms of this, we've all had these experiences of, a really amazing research environment, like an institute or a group, right? That then inspired us to become scientists almost, right? So is it possible to engineer such places and really understand, how do we create such locations, such groups, such process of doing science together as an art, as a dance? Kind of taking those themes.
Great. And then Thomas, are you still here on that selves perspective discussion?
Yeah.
Great.
So I suggested that the understanding that there's no singular and permanent self is a common ground between sciences of life, information and cognition, at least, and also Buddhist philosophy. And then if that is so, then what do we do with that knowledge? Is it bracketed, or can we somehow take it in and use it constructively? We'll spend some time talking about that and contemplating it perhaps rather than meditating it.
Great. And then Xavier, if you want to give a couple sentences about yours.
Yeah, so we talked a bit about maybe you could say the ideal or either an ideal or a caricature of sort of post-Enlightenment philosophy and science, and especially analytic, as sort of emotionless and like pure reason following steps, and then kind of wondering about the place for like gestalt aha understanding, wonder about the place of emotion and resonance, and whether or not those have a place in science. And I think what came up in the discussion was, of course, how much the actual practice of science doesn't fit that ideal or caricature. And it's, in fact, very emotional and passionate. And you're cutting down arguments and excited and like tragic. And how, mathematicians speak a lot about this aha moment when they like really understand a proof. And then a little bit of questioning about whether that's changing in the like um, lean assisted computer aided proofs world. Does that change the nature of like the gestalt understanding as a significant part of what the practice of mathematics is?
All right, thank you. And now I don't see Adam in the list. Was anyone in Adam's practice? I just want to say a word about. I mean, this is harder to say a word about because the whole point is doing it. But something that might come into our emerging themes from there.
I think it's quite difficult to summarize well, but I mean, it involved like this intense visualization and interaction with this visualization through breathing, and imagining, for example, giving a kind of like taking in, an anxiety from someone else, or visualize self, and then being able to breathe back a goodness, or something to fill them in a positive way. So that's basically how I would describe it. Yeah, I don't know if anybody else has to add to that.
Yeah, so it seems like that's playing to what are the motivations for this kind of work, in the sense that, yeah, we want those kind of ethical criteria to actually be sort of self-consistently part of this kind of research in the way that we're talking about it, and that those experiences can help build that. Great. And then was anyone in Chaitanya's discussion on?
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
I can do that one real quick. So this was, the intention is what specific complexity methods can be helpful for contemplative research. One suggestion that Ahmed gave that I really liked is to actually have like a focused, discussion with a few people specifically in contemplative sciences here, right? So maybe himself, Yair here, I guess, right, who are more in this contemplative world, John Donne, and really kind of talk about, like the needs and specifically, what can help there. Um, and also, when we try to have that conversation, very much of a tendency to go to this meta of like, oh yeah, but should we do conceptual things if we're doing contemplation? Should we really do science? And it was almost hard to bring us back to, okay, but how do you do network science for meditation, right? Like really grounding down into concrete things. So, which we kind of tried to do, but there was back and forth.
Those are all the discussions that we had, that we were all split into those different groups. There were a lot more conversation that happened around in the hangout sessions, and then also during lunch, that hopefully some of that can come up as well. But now if, did you have something, Pavel?
Read through the themes in the chat. So there's a ground up coherence, bottom up coherence versus top down control. So kind of one of the themes. Another is so what can complexity do for contemplation more concretely? Then the role of uncertainty or mystery in knowing and knowledge production. So another one is first person versus third person perspective and second person perspective as well. The interbeing. Also risks of conceptualization as perhaps losing the point of meditation and contemplation. Perspectives as a game of moving between difference, non-duality, duality, and synthesis and third ways, triads. Worlds of Platonic forms and existence and ontology of Platonic forms. Then insight, knowledge out of practice experience versus knowledge out of reasoning and communication. Then care attractors and care repellers. So that's in the chat. If you have some other thoughts, maybe voice them or add to the chat as well.
I think, Pablo, an interesting, I was just trying to write this, and maybe I'll just say it briefly, is something that surprised me and I think is very interesting, but maybe to those of you who have this kind of academic background, it wasn't surprising, which is, in fact, when the group is talking about whatever this complexity is, it is sort of repeatedly, seemingly intrinsically multidisciplinary. Like in some ways, it kind of has to be. As soon as you seem to be talking about a system almost with respect to any phenomena, there seems to be biology. Oh, there's physics. There's some polymath thing. And I found that quite interesting and surprising. I don't know how to say that, but it seemed to emerge almost in every single it's like a property of almost every single discussion when talking about complexity.
Nice. Can you phrase it in like a sentence?
Yeah, can somebody help me phrase it? Is it just like systems are, to talk about systems, they are intrinsically multidisciplinary? I don't know. Is that it, Xavier? I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. And it really was.
I don't know.
Yeah, please, Jen.
I don't know if people, I'm sure you're aware of Bazarab Nicolescu's transdisciplinarity, which is a dreadfully long word. But that's very much, he did a paper and a little while ago now, but it's very much about realizing the things between have a great deal of fertility in them for new ideas. So in fact, the academic sciences and the way things are boxed off has actually caused a reduction in our ability to think, because it's kind of, and the way it's siloed with financially as well in universities, and that thinking gets boxed in. And his work is certainly about trying to find those kind of what's happening in between all those things, and also between just regular ordinary stakeholders, people not in academic fields.
I feel like
I
that
want
almost
to talk about interdisciplinarity because my work is intrinsically multidisciplinary, and because we bring together kind of mathematics with physics, with computer science, with biology, with economics. I had students in all of these areas. And in my class, I have students from all of those subjects. And the system of Harvard and other universities is actually, it works on the undergraduate level for this multidisciplinary thing. And it doesn't really on the departmental level. So the departments are sort of narrow and inward looking. And therefore, I'm in two departments, but that doesn't work either because sort of you're not sort of, you can't really be in two departments. It's too much work. Sort of you can actually only be in one department. So universities have a problem. They want to do multidisciplinary, but they don't really know how to do it. So to bring multidisciplinarity into a discussion is always extremely useful. Everybody talks about it. Everybody is very focused, wants it to support it, but very few universities ever really achieve it and don't really know how to do it. And I think for complexity, you definitely need it.
I almost feel like that echoes the point, Martin, you made about the openness of this conference or this group and this welcoming of religion, right? So, okay, should we go into breakouts?
Wait, Pablo, I want to piggyback one thing on what Martin just said, which I think is actually, I know that we're short on time and I'm probably speaking too much. I actually think what he said is not often said, and then I actually sort of think it's sort of sage/prophetic. So I've been in a lot of spaces for the past 10, 15 years talking about multidisciplinarity and endless. And it's cool, and there's no judgment or criticism. An idea I've never heard, which I just heard before, and maybe we could reduce it and also explore it further and write it down. And maybe I think maybe to you, Martin, it's obvious, but my guess is it's not obvious to many people. Is you're sort of saying, what would it look like if we thought about how to think about problems or phenomena in a multidisciplinary way,
through complexity. Maybe the way that we can bring folks, like, rather than trying to find simpler problems where different disciplines can agree, what if we actually tried to bring disciplines together through something synergistic and generative between them around complexity? And that is, I don't know if I'm saying that coherently, but I've never thought about that before. I think it's a very interesting idea.
Yeah.
And
So
I would be up to continue that in room number 2 for whoever's interested, because that's kind of part of my PhD research, along with the core questions, kind of that and the core questions focus.
Great.
Yeah, so now the idea is that for the rest of the time until lunch, we can split into these three discussion groups that are now open, these 3 breakout rooms. And so you can choose which of these 3 questions you really are most interested in, you think you have ideas for. And each of these is going to try to generate some document in the next half hour.